We're all familiar with the story of the widow's mite. We've probably grown up having it explained to us that Jesus is praising the woman for putting in her last 2 cents, her whole livelihood. If that's a proper interpretation of this gospel, then we're all in a really bad place, right? Because when we give, we always make sure we have a little bit left. Because we have bills to pay, food to put on the table, those kinds of concerns, which means none of us share in the praise of the widow. And I'm almost certain throughout the world today there are going to be many preachers who give that interpretation. They'll talk about the spirit or the attitude of the woman who gives, placing her full trust in the Lord. However, this is a false reading of the gospel. Jesus says nothing about her spirit, nothing about her attitude. And if we pay close attention to the text, we'll find that the opposite is true of the usual interpretation given. The first paragraph of the gospel, Jesus is criticizing the scribes, and he says, "They devour the houses of widows, and as a pretext, recite lengthy prayers. They will receive a very severe condemnation." And then he sat down opposite the treasury. In the Greek, it's kate nanti, not just on the other side of the treasury or opposed in the sense of direction, but in opposition to. He's against what's going on here. The idea that there would be a widow in Jerusalem who felt compelled by religion to place in her last 2 cents, that woman should be taking money out of the treasury rather than putting money into it. And we miss this part. We do, of course, have an obligation to provide for the mission of the church, right? This church is yours. We, as a community, have to pay the bills for the lights and those kinds of things. In the Old Testament, right, God is very clear. He wants the first fruits of your labor, a tithe, literally 10%. In the New Testament, in the Acts of the Apostles, it's clear that the Christian community put all that they had together and lived in common and made sure that everyone's needs were met. What the church requires is that according to our means, as we are able, we provide for the function of our parish and for the church. We do have an obligation to the poor, to the oppressed, to the afflicted, and it's not enough for us to sign a check and give it to the government and let them take care of the poor, right? They usually don't do that great of a job. It's also not enough for us to sign a check and give it to the church and let the church take care of the poor, although we do an awful lot of that. We're supposed to, from our own resources, within our own communities, neighborhoods, families, friends, those that we meet, take care of alleviating the needs of the poor that we encounter. That's an obligation. 2 Corinthians does say that God loves a cheerful giver. Freely in our poverty have we received from the abundance of the graces of Christ, and therefore all that we have, we give back to him. But it's not meant to take this story of the widow's mite and have you go home, check your bank account, and write out a check and give it to the church. Why is that a bad idea? Well, you have bills to pay. Your children need to eat. So, having said that, I want to draw your attention. In the front of the church, in the narthex, you'll see a little box. poor box. That money that's in there is set aside in our accounting, and from it we help out the poor. Sometimes they need a tank of gas to get back home. Sometimes they need work boots or a little food or a little help with a bill. And so we provide for them here at St. Margaret Mary's out of what's in the poor box. Deacon John is involved in helping the homeless and in other endeavors trying to help our homeless, our poor, our afflicted out here. And so if you wish to get involved, simply speak to him. I know he's got tons of things that you could do. There's a corruption of religion that begins to ask for people to give up their wealth. Pay particularly close attention to the charities, the churches, the preachers who ask for your money. When you see them with Ferraris and mansions and private jets, stop sending them money, right? That's called fleecing the flock. I've been very careful since I've been here to make sure that our costs that we have are not passed along to the poor among us. We do not charge for funerals. We do not charge for weddings. We do not charge for quinceañeras. We do not charge for religious education. None of those things are meant to be a burden upon people. One of the other problems that we have, especially as, Americans, is when we're going through a tough spot, we don't want anyone to know. And so we say nothing to those around us. If we are a family, if we're a family here at St. Margaret Mary's, the children of God, when you're hurting financially, this is the first place you should come to ask for help. And we'll help with what we can. So our obligation to one another is, one, to alleviate what suffering we find around us in our neighborhoods, whether that be through financial means or a word of comfort, however that works. And two, to not be embarrassed about needing help. If we're really a family together, we ought to be at the ready always to help one another. In the end, it's all about the imitation of Christ and following his command. He's the one that told us the poor we will always have with us. Right? The miracle done in the first reading today by the prophet is not meant as an example for us to say, give away everything that you have and maybe God then will give you more. What if the more that God has given you is what he's already given you? It's meant to be a visualization for the whole people of Israel and for us as Catholics. That God so loves the poor, the widow, the orphan, the oppressed, that we too must love them and do whatever we can to alleviate their suffering.